Oh, okay. Let me try this one more time. All right. I think we're live. Welcome, everyone, back to another edition of the Perception Action Journal Club. It's my pleasure, very pleasure, to be joined by Greg Souders. You can see him, and he's live in studio.
What's going on, guys?
Greg is Greg. I've interviewed on the podcast before, but I asked him to come back on and talk a little bit about his approach to teaching jiu-jitsu, specifically grappling, submission grappling. So, Greg, welcome back. Can you give, for those that haven't met you before, can you give a little intro
For sure.
of who you are?
Yeah.
We got also, I told you we've got a question already about what you did before you started coaching.
So anyone who's out there, I can't see who's actually joined us, but before I introduce myself, just I'd like this thing to go whatever direction it wants to. So you guys have any questions about anything, please start asking. We'll take this thing in any direction.
Thanks for saying that, Greg. I should have said that. Thank you.
Yeah, but no, it's okay. It's okay.
You're on top of it.
Yeah. But either way, my name is Greg Souders. I run a submission grappling gym and jiu-jitsu gym out of Rockville, Maryland. I spend all my time full-time coaching. I got into this whole mess when searching to try to become a better coach. I opened my school in 2014, and I really was unsure about how to go about this coaching thing. So I started digging into the depths of the internet, trying to find people who did it better than I did, or at least knew what the hell they were doing. And it brought me to here, to ecological dynamics, ecological psychology, the constraints-led approach. And I've spent the last 10 years now trying to implement some of these theories and ideas into the practice that I have here at my gym.
Yeah. And I think you're a great example of someone that's applied all this stuff, which is hard. It's not always easy to apply these concepts, I think. So can we start off with maybe, Greg, your kind of overall framework you think about how teaching, maybe how it differs from traditional coaching in this area?
The initial problem that I ran into is when the way I learned jiu-jitsu was by people showing me moves and techniques. So, you do your warm up, you run around, do some physical exercises, then an instructor sits you out in the middle of the room and he says, hey, we're going to start learning. Here's this guard pass. Here is this sweep. Here is this arm lock. And we spend the majority, 30, 45 minutes of the class doing static repetition. Whatever the step-by-step pattern was, the instructor showed, and you would just repeat that. And that was supposed to teach you. And then after you'd spend 30 to 45 minutes doing this, you would spend the latter half of the class, 15, 20 minutes sparring live, whether it be in a situation specific to what we just learned or an open round. That was the expectation of how we were going to go about learning these movements. And when I first started coaching and I started doing this, I realized it was a huge problem. You realize that if it's all just technique, move, counter, the system of what we do becomes bloated or so full so quickly, it was almost impossible to memorize the 13 steps to this one move, but then there was 27 steps to this counter and 37 steps to the next move, and it just became ridiculous. So I really was curious about how we could talk about this in a different way. So the beginning of my framework basically tries to take this bloated system of jiu-jitsu techniques and moves and strips it all down into basic human behaviors. What is the nature of the game we are playing, and what is the nature of the actions we take to create tactics to successfully play the game? And that's where I started off with building a framework. To simplify all that, it's just take the human, put them back into the system so that we could talk about the behavior as simple human to human behaviors.
Yeah. And I think the key word for me you're using is system, right? You want to look at the whole system. The problem with teaching someone moves is you're pulling it out of the system, right? When do I use that move? Why? How? I think people struggle with that.
For sure.
When you just teach a technique in that out of context, you don't connect it with the information that tells you when it's going to be effective. So
for sure. I mean, in our sport, the word system means many different things. And I think the way you and I are talking about it sort of missed if anyone is listening that is coming from a jiu-jitsu or a fighting realm. So we have an initial, I think, some of the great instructors that are currently in our field, like John Danaher is our great right now. He does the best job at describing jiu-jitsu analytically. So they create systems and situations. So we'll take one situation, we'll create a bunch of if-then
Mm-hmm.
interactions, which I think is a nice step in the direction. Like if I do this with physical, I could get this response with physical certainty if, the level of analysis is clean enough. But still, I think that misses the real spirit of the system. And the system really is just two bodies interacting continuously towards a common end or the resistance of that common end. And so by system, we mean that anything present, whether it be the temperature of the room, the slipperiness of the mat, the weights of the two individuals, the psychologies of the two individuals, all these things are interacting in such a way that everything is affecting everything at all times. So trying to take this into account when we're looking out and observing behavior and trying to create practice tasks to manipulate it towards, the building of skill, I think needs to be looked at in a more holistic way. And again, the whole system needs to be taken into account, everything that's present, not just how the tactics themselves connect.
Yeah. I think when you describe it that way, that's one of the big problems, I think, with it. There's no possible way you could teach someone every possible situation that could arrive out of all those factors you described. There's an infinite number of possible system situation, constraints, situation, whatever you want to call it, that you're going to have to deal with. Trying to teach you this move works then. Yeah.
For sure. And even if we create a good system of analysis for a specific position where these things are likely to occur, even a little bit of fatigue can change the outcome. Even a little bit of sweat can change the outcome, which is fine. Okay. These are some things we can't control. But then the question becomes, what is underneath all of this? So that no matter how sweaty we get, for example, or how fatigued we get, we can always act in such a way to maximize our engagement towards an end that we're trying to achieve without trying to pigeonhole it into these steps and sequences that must happen.
Yeah. I think that's where kind of your difference starts with the quote unquote fundamentals of every sport. There's a big debate going on Twitter now about the jab, teaching boxing, how a jab, but the idea of the fundamentals not being a set of techniques or a set of moves or holds or whatever you want, but as being outcomes or affordances in the language of ecological dynamics that you're trying to create.
For sure.
And what you've done is you've kind of broken it down into, like you said, this within the system, there's some clear ones you're trying to, like, I think another way I think the system is a good analogy, that there's a system has points of stability and instability. And a lot of what you're trying to do as a fighter is create instability in the system.
For
right?
sure. Or stabilize the system
towards
the common end. It really depends on what we're going towards. And so that really starts the big picture of my framework, which is we play the game of immobilization as it leads to strangulation and breaking. So the reason I think that the reason I put this as the foundation is because all of our actions taken, no matter how they appear, try to introduce greater levels of immobility into the system relative to our opponent or the resistance of that. So if someone's trying to hold me still, I'm trying to resist it. While I'm resisting it, I'm trying to create opportunities or find opportunities where I can start holding them still. And this is what the fight is over. And the reason this is the foundation is there's a relationship between things that don't move and things that break. We can think of it as simple as breaking a stick. The more stiff and rigid the stick, the easier it breaks. The human body is very similar. If we are straightening arms or twisting arms, they become more breakable in those states, being straightened or twisted when they're bent, when they're still and stable. And so if I'm resisting that, I would move. If I'm applying it, I would try to make you not move. And this is applied to almost every level of our engagement, from initial contact to the finishing of a submission. So again, levels of functional degrees of immobility, but going from initiation of it to the completion of it is the dance that's going on in the game that we play.
Okay. So you're trying to, in that example, instead of teaching someone when the person bends their arm like this, do this, you're trying to teach them to pick up the information based on the position, both visual, tactile, that creates this opportunity to be able to directly, it's kind of like an intelligence, an action. Kathy Craig calls it action intelligence, right? Knowing what to do when, because you're picking up information from the environment that tells you what you can do. Yeah.
So then I'll give you a physical example if you want. I've got my
Sure.
training partner
Okay.
here.
Awesome.
Also for you too, Rob, so you can see it because I know that you're a baseball guy, not a fight guy.
I'm not a.
Uh,
This is
so
out of my realm.
I'll use the example I always do. I always start with the submission because I think a lot of people like to see it this way, and especially if you're new to the sport, you can't see the nuances of like a more variable position. I like to look at something that's low in variability. Now, the nature of a submission, it has once certain conditions are met, it has the start of the submission and the end of the submission, which is very easy to see. And this is a simple way that we can see how immobility creates breakability in a given system. So if Noah just arm lock breaking position, later back. So let's say we're working with a new student and we wanted to use the idea of immobilization as it leads to strangulation and breaking. And we want to start with that big concept. But we know we ultimately need to teach them the skill of creating this state. We'll just start them in the state itself. So we'll define it for them, calling it the arm lock breaking position. And we will tell them what the objective of this is. The objective of this position is ultimately to learn how to hold your partner still so we can straighten and ultimately break the arm. So that is what we're trying to do here. So we put someone directly in the situation so they can pick up those affordances present relative to immobilizing our opponent and then having the opponent resist it. So we have to constantly stabilize that struggle into the outcome we're searching for, which is to hold our partner still. So we'd literally start them in the situation itself, connected with the legs and arms, and they'd be given simple tasks. My job as the top player is to stay on top and hold my partner down using the connections of my arms and legs. The bottom player had been given an objective. Their objective would be to pull their arm free from my connections or to get their back up off the mat.
Okay.
Because both of those things for the bottom player, pulling the arm out and getting their back off the mat, increase mobility, while me staying here and holding him down, stopping that, decreases mobility in their system. So they start to experience the foundation of what we're doing in an alignment that they're ultimately going to learn how to create themselves. But first, we need to give the shared experience of immobilizing a part of the system while facing the resistance of that. So both players start to learn how to perceive and pick up affordances relative to their intentions.
Okay. And do you in that situation, do you have very kind of the kind of skill level and what the two people are doing, one maybe trying more skilled at getting out of it versus
for sure. So now, of course, we're talking about the scalability problem now. So of course, we know that there is no general way we can solve that because at the end of it, we know that all skill development is personal. But either way, we try to match people up based on size and skill initially. So if we're working the foundations class, we would try to get people with a similar level of experience. We could say that from week 1 to year 1 is close enough that it's not going to cause too much of a problem if their skills are drastically different. And especially in a position like this where the variability is relatively low, if we put even new players in a relatively low variability setting, they're still going to have some level of success because the system itself is uneven. So let me show you what I mean by uneven. So let's imagine that the better guy, the skilled players on the bottom, he's still in a highly immobilized situation where he is being held down by legs. He is being attached to by arms. So this is a huge problem. The philosophy of jiu-jitsu can be simply articulated as creating using more of ourselves against less of our opponents to create a mechanical, strategical, tactical advantage. So in this case, we're expressing that philosophy here. We're using more of our body to attack less of our opponent's body. So the nature of it is scaled just by the nature of the position itself. So a new player will have more success as the top player here against
the position you're starting in.
Exactly, because the nature of the position itself. Now, on the other side of things, once they change top to bottom and the lesser skilled guy gets to be on the bottom, he's probably going to lose a lot. But it's okay. So, I mean, of course, you know this, that, learning is nonlinear. We don't know what the input-output ratio is. We don't know how many touches per unit time create which effect. So we know that sometimes experiencing the negative or the loss creates a differential. So they get to experience one side of it more than another. And that's completely fine. But we don't want it to be so overwhelming that they don't enjoy their experience.
They don't come back next week.
That's right. So again, we use time, we use weight, we use skill disparity at the lowest level to try to solve this problem.
You give them you're using you're giving them problem to solve, right? Rather than tell them. So do you worry at all about how they get into that position in the first place?
Oh, absolutely.
Is that separate? You do that separately?
Well, yeah. So the thing is when we initially play, we play the game in slices. Now, these slices are artificial, okay? But we're trying to help them understand that no matter what it looks like, it's ultimately producing the same function. But these functions strung together between, let's say, some specific starting point and some specific end continuously produce this effect towards the end. So we would start them in the end state. Okay, this is where a game would be won if I was able to reach this outcome. So then what we do is we pick some scale and we back out. Okay, so the great thing about grappling is that there are these invariant features of the human body that we know produce specific outcomes. For example, if we want to access the shoulder, we have to get rid of the elbow. So when we're teaching new people how to create the situation of the arm lock breaking position, once we show them what that is, we back away in a situation where they're already behind the elbow. So an example would be, because this is the invariant nature of manipulating arms relative to reaching a position where they become breakable. And it's how we deal with the three segments of our arm: the wrist, the elbow, and the shoulder. The wrist protects the elbow protects the shoulder. So we want to start to teach this experience by giving people, teach this by giving people experiencing this situation. So the next place we would start is we would start without the head covered and behind the elbow. So we would give them a new starting situation. We give them new tasks. So we just like before, it would be stay on top and hold your partner down. But now they have to reach that point we just trained in by covering our opponent's head and staying on top and holding our partner down. So now they get to experience a new level of movement and a new level of variability, but they ultimately connect. So being able to stay behind someone's elbow and stay on top is a precondition for reaching the arm lock breaking position by covering the head and reaching this outcome. So we would just give them that task. Keep the arm, stay on top, hold your partner down, try to cover the head. Once you cover the head, stay here for as long as you can, hold your partner down. Bottom player would be given the same task as they were before. Get your back up off the mat or pull your arm out. So then they'd experience the conditions that would lead to that ultimate outcome.
Are your instructions to them always fairly, high level like that? Stay on top of the person rather than, or do you ever use kind of bodily focus? Get your leg over this, get your leg over their legs, or how do you kind of?
For sure. I go relative to the room. So at first I might start vague. Stay on top and hold your partner down. Now this vagueness is for searching. So when somebody's new, I just want them to have an experience. I want them to literally, am I holding them down? Did they get up? And so then I might be a little more explicit in the what I want them to do. So we might play the series of games again, but this time I'll say our job is to stay on top and hold our partner down. We're going to focus on doing this by keeping our partner's head covered. So then I would give them an extra task focus so that they could see, oh, I'm holding him down or not. I'm covering his head or I'm not. And so now they could see the effects of that action. And if it's close enough to what would be invariant or what would be necessary for this to be done in an effective way, then they tend to keep searching for that information and ultimately organizing around it.
Do you try to avoid any kind of like any technical, like from the one, like get your leg on top of, or where you're referring to a particular solution movement from the person on top, for example? Would you ever say something like that?
Sorry, repeat it one more time.
So would you ever say to the person, get your leg around? So get very technical and thinking about their own body instead of cover the person's face. That's still a nice external.
I try to keep everything external. So the language we use is we have a condition that creates an effect. So how can I get myself out of my head, right? So we don't want to be looking into that internal space. We want to look out because, again, the reason we move is because of what's happening in front of us. So teaching the person how to look outside of themselves to create the effect they're looking for by fulfilling a condition, I think, is how we can focus on keeping that language external, because all we're ever doing in this game is affecting our opponent. And so they are the comparator, right? They are the thing that's letting us know, are we having an effect if we fulfill these conditions? Is it working? It gives us the immediate feedback. And so by focusing on, again, affecting them with this action, with that action, with this action, is where we try to keep it.
Yeah. No, I like that. Great. That's something I like to use in baseball as well. Teaching by movement effects is such a powerful a tool, I think. I want you to hit the ball over there and low. It is a very powerful way to to teach someone, as opposed to I want you to swing like this, which is kind of,
one of my students, DeAndre Corby, who I've been, he was he's a black belt who came to me 4 years ago, and I started developing him as an elite athlete. And I started teaching him about this stuff. So giving him the books, having long form discussions with him. He's read this stuff and understands it extremely well. He's just not a teacher yet, but I think when he does become one, he's going to do great. But he said this one thing, and jiu-jitsu guys who are listening will understand this. He said, what came first? The mount, which is a position where we cover our opponent's hips. So the mount is just a position where we cover our opponent's hips and a chest-to-chest alignment, right? What came first, this position or a movement we call the shrimp, which is where our partner gets on their side and moves in such a way to bring their legs back in front. Keep going. Freeze.
Okay.
So there is the position, and then there's the movement that we do to escape the position, right? So traditionally, in a traditional class, what they would do is they'd have people go up and down the mat doing a movement pattern that looks like the shrimp. So without a partner, it would look something like this.
Yeah.
But the question is what came first?
Yeah.
The shrimp or the mount? So if we know that it's a relational movement, meaning I had to be mounted for this to emerge, that's the origin. So if the origin is of that interaction, why would we get it to emerge any other way? So in your baseball example, the only reason a person ever swung a bat at a ball is relative to where they wanted to hit it.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I think that's a great way to. What if you have, so you're teaching a new athlete and they're really struggling, they're on the bottom. Would you ever, why don't you try this, or how do you deal with that? I get asked that a lot.
So not at first, I don't like to do that, because I think that what makes language more powerful is a shared experience. So we give the student a problem, we let them experience it, we let them struggle. And we want to get their experience as close to what we know to be true of that experience. So we want to get them as close to our understanding as possible. And I first like to have them dig to develop this understanding. And I think it can be expressed simply as this. What was your intention? So I always ask questions before I give answers. Hey, coach, I'm struggling with this. Great. What was your intention? What were you trying to do? I was trying to use my hand to move his foot. Okay, great. Did you try that? Yeah. Did you succeed? Yes. Cool. Do it again. Did you fail? Yeah. Why? If they can't tell me why, I will not suggest something else.
Okay.
Because if they're not paying attention to the result of their actions, then no matter what I give them, they'll just be them copying me. They'll never develop a true understanding for why something worked. But if they could say, like, I'm trying this and this is why I'm failing, and they're clear, and I see that too. So now we have a shared experience. If I give them a potential search space or a potential something to enhance their success there, now we're discussing the same thing. We both know what the intention was. We both know the outcome of our interaction. So then this suggestion will be clearly communicated between both of us relative to the problem we both know we're solving. And so it creates a deeper connection between the intentions of the coach and the intentions of the athlete.
Yeah. No, I like that a lot. I think you're right. Kind of how you couch it and thinking the same way. That's the way I like to think of it. I'm going to say, why don't you try over here in solution space? If you're both thinking of it in terms of that, you're not really giving them the answer, but you're just kind of pushing them over here guiding them over here for a bit and see if that works. Sure. Yeah. I like that a lot.
Well, as a practitioner myself, I've developed a lot of successful movement solutions, and I can play the game relatively well. But that doesn't mean I'm optimally playing it. So for me to give that hard answer, I feel like I'm taking something away from my athlete. I keep attributing this to Carl Newell, but I think it's him. He said, we have to teach what is known, but we have to leave room for what is unknown. And I take that very seriously. So I'd rather, like you said, give us a parameter for search rather than a hard this.
Yeah.
Because I don't know if we're playing the game optimally right now. There might be something that we don't see as a communal system that needs to emerge, because it's only going to emerge in a struggle. If I were to blind the student from the struggle by having them repeat what I already know, then we might not get the new thing that we need. So anyway, give the search generally, and then.
Yeah, I think optimality is relative to the constraints you're facing, right? It's an effective solution given this. So you don't, as a coach, you can't be experiencing. You don't know what all the constraints are there. Plus, they're changing and dynamic, right? There's no way you can say this will work, even though it would work for you. No, I think that's a great way. That's a great way to think about it. So you each day you kind of have You start with kind of a game, like that. So how do you, in your mind, how do you kind of schedule or plan these? Are you breaking that? Are you focusing on
Yeah,
the same kind of invariant, or
for
so do
sure.
you
I
kind
mean,
of, so let's help people out here, maybe this. So you have kind of, would you call them affordances, like immobilization? Is that an affordance in your mind?
yeah.
Or
Okay, so that's a
we're
great question. I've been thinking
getting
about
the
this a lot.
language here.
I keep thinking about Gibson's thing,
Yeah.
right? It's subjective and objective, but it's neither.
Yeah.
I keep thinking about that. What does that really mean? So let's imagine I give you a position. I say, we know I stay on top and hold your partner down.
Mhm.
And we know, because the game you play, there's a relation between immobilization, strangulation, and breaking. So that means there's information somewhere in the system that allows us to organize our human structure around their human structure to make that immobilization happen. And
Mhm.
the affordance is personal, but it's
Yes.
still relative to the objective outcomes we're trying to achieve. So let's say, for example, I know that by getting my arm underneath my opponent's elbow, like in this area, I can have better rate of extension. I know that somewhere in there, the closer I put my arm to my opponent's, I can extend it. And I can show that in a second if you want.
Mhm.
I just give that as a task itself. And so the affordance, whatever that may be, is present somewhere when humans try to perform that action based on that objective outcome. So
Mhm.
whether it be the thing itself, exactly where I position my arm, or it's that internal way I structure myself to apply the force, because the affordance could
Yeah.
be that both those are all of it or none of it.
Yeah.
I know it
Yeah.
sounds crazy,
No,
but
no, you're right. Like, yeah, like that quote from Gibson's perfect. Is it subjective or objective? Yes.
well,
It goes both ways. Yeah.
it's objective in the way that we're manipulating a body. We can
Mhm.
see that there are certain alignments that have specific outcomes, but it's subjective in the way that we're experiencing it. And so, again, we give each individual a place to experience the effect of their actions, to
Yeah.
fulfill conditions, to create specific effects. In that sense, we know that affordances are being picked up if outcomes are consistent against in the face of variability and novelty.
Yeah.
So to solve that problem, or to really make sure we're doing it justice, is we follow a simple rule: a high frequency. So we try to play as much of the game as we can every day. And by
Okay.
as much of the game, we mean no, however we slice it, there's going to be a top player and a bottom player in front of legs or past legs. And we want to experience all the different, as many different alignments in those two macro situations as we can daily.
Yeah.
Um, but because the real key here is functionality, not aesthetic.
Nice. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
no matter where we are on top of somebody, whether in front or past legs, in breaking positions or in pinning positions, in guard passing positions or otherwise, we're always trying to stay on top and hold our partner down so we can immobilize. So we
Okay.
experience that every single day.
And invariants are in this case are can not maybe conditions of effective movement solutions that will achieve the affordance. Is that
For
maybe?
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
let's look at
yeah.
something
Yeah.
and talk about how we can use
Yeah.
it here in our sport. So I'm gonna go to the mounted position. So we talk about one of the skills that we are trying to create is segmentation. So
Mhm.
segmentation is the idea that when my partner is trying to create space on me from a pinning position, for example, they have to present the end of their segments to start moving me. So the hands, right? So we have
Mhm.
three segments on a given joint. We have the hand, we have the elbow, and we have the shoulder. And these are high, lines of demarcation, right?
Mhm.
This just organized very well. Hands do something relative to elbows, elbows do something relative to shoulders. And we have to interact in a segmentary way. So
Mhm.
when the hand touches me, if I want to get to the elbow, I must move the hand. Once the hand's out of the way, I now have access to the elbow. If I
Okay.
want to get to the shoulder, I have to move the elbow.
Okay.
So in that sense, it's an invariant feature of how an arm functions relative to distance management. So if he
Mhm.
wants to create space on me, he must use the segments, the hand,
Right.
the elbow, and the shoulder. So I must experience manipulating hands, elbows, and shoulders if I want to create consistent
You
outcomes
want
in
to
the
break
face of
that.
variability and novelty. So
Okay.
this is just invariant. This has to happen. Um, so now the way we orient this combination, we don't know. But we
Mhm.
know that if we're going to search the area to take away space, we start with what's creating it. In order
Okay.
to create space, we start with the thing that we can touch our opponent with. And so we're both kind of playing around with this invariant thing in a complex, continuous way to create the outcomes we're searching for. And again, it relates to immobilization, strangulation, and breaking.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. And bringing lots of Gibson ideas. So in
I read a
teaching
lot of
those, well, yeah, you know, I know we're speaking the same way. Knowledge about and knowledge of is, so there's a place for explaining, like to me, like you just described to an athlete. But I think what you were saying before, giving lots of frequency and variance, you in order to experience an environment, pick it up, you have to be in a variable environment and see what doesn't change, right? That's why Gibson called it that. Yeah. So
I
you have a
think,
mix of both. Yeah.
well, so in a class, not necessarily. So typically, because of I don't know enough about working memory, but or if it even exists. So the way we've been talking about this is perceptive load. So the whole idea is we're taking stuff in perceptively. So we're trying to detect information from the environment as we play. I feel that a coach's words are information. So I feel like the more we load the perception, we can basically blind the information source. So if a student comes with the expectation, again, this is where we're getting affect. Like how does Gibson explain, psychology, which he really doesn't. But either way, I imagine that it's taking place. So if a student comes in and has an expectation of what the coach is doing, that could shift their intention internally. What does the coach think of me? Am I doing this right? Am I listening to what he's saying? Sometimes I feel like that can blind from the source. So I don't like to talk about me and what my expectations are too much. I give enough about to perform the action, and that's it. But later on, if we're sitting around talking after class and we want to talk about the nature of two bodies, man, I'll do knowledge about all day. But I don't want knowledge about to get in the way of the experience for knowledge of. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. I agree with that's exactly the way I do it too. I like to go out and sit in the office and talk about that. And then when we go to the batting cage, I want that out of your head. I want that gone. Let's leave that discussion we had with one thought. Like, but I don't want. Yeah, I think you're right. It creates a filter on how you pick up information if you get too thinking about that too much. You're looking for certain things. Yeah, I think that's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so you want people to pick it up through experience, through doing this game over and over from all these different positions. This is the key. Like that's Gibson. That's why he called it that, right? You pick up this feature that's not changed. There's something that's not changing. That's the commonality for all the effective movement solutions that worked is this. And you probably can't describe it like that. Any way meaningful. We had a discussion before we started on the difficulty of putting this into language sometimes.
I think language is a poor representation of reality. So we talked about this earlier. The IP guys talk about information as being impoverished as it comes in, and our brain has to make sense of it. But I think it's the other way around. I think information coming in is pure, but our thoughts about it are impoverished. I think about this simply like, let's say I'm an artist and I look out at a horse. I can clearly see all the dimensions of that horse. But when you give me a pencil and tell me to draw it, whatever the hell's going on in here is not coming out of my hand. But I can tell you what a horse looks like. I can describe it as clear as I'm seeing it. But again, putting it to paper, clearly I'm drawing my representation. And my representation of a horse looks like some kind of stick figure with some broken legs or some shit. I don't know. So I think that, I mean, of course, not getting too deep in the philosophy of things, but I feel like our indirect perception or our symbolic information is an override that comes out later in the record than the action. So things happen and then we discuss them after. Every argument for everything that's ever happened is ad hoc. So, I take that seriously.
Yeah, no, I think we have this overwhelming urge to try to like this metacognition and kind of urge to try to explain things, why things happen. And I don't think it's very good. It's very ad hoc and missing a lot of pieces, but we love to do it for some reason. We're doing to it. A couple of questions here. Is that what you'd start with a complete newbie? The pin?
For sure. So we try to start with just low variability games, just games where there's not much change. And we like to start with these end states so people know what they're working towards. So we want them to let them know that all of our actions starting disconnected to connected are for an outcome. We're to achieve some end state here. That acts as like a guiding point for behavior when someone is unsure of what they're playing for. It's like, two people are playing basketball and it's very simple. I want to put the ball in that hole, go towards that. No matter how fucked up their dribbling is or how much their defenders are doing their job, if they know their job is to put that ball in that hole, that basically orients the game. And so, look, we start with those end states, not only for creating that end state focus is what we're playing the game towards, but also because at the end state, because the nature of the unevenness of the connection, it's low in variability. It's almost discrete, even serial in its nature. So anyway, that's where we start.
Yeah, no, I like that. And I think that, that idea of nested affordances, right? You understand where you're going, at the end, what you're trying to achieve, you build affordances on top of each other. The other question on a question about safety in the breaking game, do you enjoy locks and mechanics? How do you deal with that? These kind of games.
Because I'm talking to you, sir.
Okay.
I'll be less Greg than I normally am. But
you don't worry about that too much.
Guys, we're playing a sport. We're not letting our students go crazy and do crazy things to each other. We're constraining the environment in such a way that we're focusing their attention around these safe features. Hold the body still, extend an arm. Now we have the safe word of tap. So now, tap is, if you're uncomfortable, tap, the student lets go right away. You have to teach them this because we are putting the arms, legs, and neck in positions that will do damage to the system. It's all fun and games to twist arms until your shoulder breaks. It's all fun and games until you go unconscious from having your neck squeezed. This is the nature of the reality of the game that we play. We try to constrain it to keep it as safe as possible, but stuff does happen. Now, if it's constrained well and you create a good culture where people care about one another and they know they have to go to work in the morning and that we agree to do this to each other, this will enhance the safety of the room. Also the way we enhance safety is, one, not to talk about it, not to talk about all that could happen, but it's to expose people to low levels of stressors so their expectations about it drop, which reduce the urgency by which they respond to it, acting as a safety mechanism in and of itself. So a clever coach understands this and will use exposure in doses to create these safe environments. Because once you get to the advanced level, we're going hard. We're trying to break each other and nobody gets hurt.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good way to think. It's a shared experience again, I think you're talking about. And kind of the overreaction to little things is more dangerous sometimes than well, that's a good point. And then a question about how I think we talked about how so you're going to start with that, then you're going to add that game, and then would you add variability to that game across weeks, right?
For sure. Like variability is key, no matter what framework you operate from, whether we're operating as the brain's a computer or, it's an online modeling system, whatever, we're still using variability. We know this is true. So we have to keep variability present all the time because as the system stabilizes, it needs to be perturbed to create future skills. Absolutely. It could be something as simple as changing partner. It could be something as simple as changing time. It could be add some task complication, right? So rather than starting with the head covered, starting with the head uncovered, start with a grip that's less stable than the other grip you started with. I mean, start on the other side of the body. But yes, variability is constantly added all the time for day to day.
Yeah, constant repetition without repetition. Classic. Yeah, you're trying to achieve the same, whether it's keeping on top of the person or getting your back off the ground, but from different positions, right? Yeah. I think that's critical, and that's critical for, like we said, learning those invariants, right? Those key features of So I think that's. Let me see if there's anything. There's a couple. I think that's the good questions for now. Yeah, good question, everyone. Keep them coming. Example. How maybe a larger grappler reacts to the same situation as a smaller grappler. Do you have an example of how personal constraints affect a specific aspect of grappling, individual constraints? I guess they're talking about size.
Yeah, I know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Guys, read more books. That's a massive question. Like, forget how a big guy responds. Forget what about how all big guys respond? What about a big guy who's in shape, a big guy who isn't? What about a big guy who's coming from a D1 football program and one who's coming from getting off the couch? So bigness, though it has its own individual constraints and limiting factors, is not just a one thing. We're taking individuals into account. So again, that question is too general. It's not specific enough to give you a satisfying answer, but size changes constraints. Size itself is a constraint. And so if we can really, one thing that we would like to think about when we talk about size difference is motion. So movement goes down as body size goes up generally, because it's more tiring and more difficult for a larger man or woman to move than it is for a smaller one. As people's size decrease, movement tends to be more prevalent, more movement happens. So in that case, that's going to be the major difference. So now if you put a large person with a small person, you'll see this play out. Big person usually holds small players still if they can. Small players tries to stay mobile so they don't get hold still. And that's, I don't know, but I don't know what he's at. This is generally as I can answer it.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think I talked to my kid about when they see the other team football team before a game, they see the big guy. I'm like, that just means they're slow.
Yeah, stay away from that guy.
Again, there's certain, like you said, there's certain principles of the human body that are undeniable, right? The question: how long do you keep with the game before switching to a new one, a new principle, a new game?
So this is another difficult question to answer, because how long is relative to your room and what you mean by game. I don't know. Again, we only use that as a shortcut way for when we talk about taking small pieces and creating simple task focuses. So what I think you're really asking me is, how often do I switch task focus? Every single time we play a new game. So let's imagine in a basics class, I generally use 6 games that are spread between guarded situations and pinning situations. Every 6 minutes, new tasks are added, or the situation is changed completely. So, but what stays the same is the functional degree at which we're trying to produce what we're trying to produce. So if we're working in the foundations class with top players, no matter what else we're doing as a task, we're always trying to stay on top and hold our partner down. So no matter what situation we're in, no matter what task we're performing, no matter how we switch it, we're staying on top and holding our partner down. When we're on the bottom, no matter how we switch task or focus or objective or whatever, we're always trying to stay mobile, to either put our legs back in front of our opponent or get our back up off the mat. And so, I mean, we switch tasks every 6 minutes, but we keep them centered around those invariants.
Do you think about, does this fit at all with kind of the idea of scaffolding? Do you
let's be more specific, please.
Like I don't know. There's lots of definitions, like building.
Behavior begets behavior.
You're kind of building a competency so you can add on to the top of that. Yeah.
For sure. So let's imagine that there's a relationship between time and position and time to manipulate. So meaning if I can hold you in a specific state, fulfilling a specific condition, I have longer time to work within that state and fulfilling those conditions. And that's relative to how skillful I am at that base thing. So if we imagine that all top players have to stay on top and hold their partner down, the length at which I can do that in the face of variation and novelty, the more time I have to produce other functions. So again, so yes, so that's why we start with that. Again, if I can stay on top of you for 10 minutes and hold you down for 10 minutes, that's 10 minutes of work time that I have to produce further effects. If I can only stay on top and hold you down for 2 minutes, I'm not going to be able to explore that space as richly as I'd like to, therefore affecting the potential movement solutions that could emerge as a top player.
Okay.
So in that sense.
Yeah. So you think of kind of immobilizing, stabilizing as the floor of the,
100%.
You have to, yeah. And then we're going to build off that.
Right. And because again, it means different things in different alignments. So holding somebody down and immobilizing them in front of legs is going to produce different effects and have different conditions than once I've passed the legs. Now, once I've passed the legs, if I have the limbs in extension or contraction, that will also affect the level of immobility that's present in the system. So what we're really doing is just enhancing immobilization in all top positions relative to how long we can stay on top and hold somebody down, while slowly, or not slowly, it's not the right word, incrementally increasing the weakness of the human system by making it less mobile over time.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I always hesitate when people ask me that's about scaffolding, because scaffolding is traditionally a very linear concept. You build this function on top of that one, on top of that, but that's not the way you're teaching it. So
not at all.
But I think general, I think you're right. Yeah, you're not breaking it apart, teaching it, and then kind of reducing and then adding something on it. Yeah, for sure.
Well, let me give you an example of something that would be variable, where multiple things are interacting at once, so you can see that the scaffolding itself isn't based on just one thing. So let me make sure I have enough room for you guys. Come out here, Noah. Just belly up, open guard for me. Can you see clearly, Rob?
Yep.
Okay, so let's imagine that we're teaching a new player, how to stay on top and hold somebody down while staying standing. Meaning I at no time can put my chest on their chest. So I at no time can fall down on top of my opponent.
Okay.
I at no time can put my knees on the ground. I have to stay standing, but I still have to produce the function of holding him down.
Okay.
Now, what he's going to try to do is he's going to try to grip a hold of me with his legs and arms, and he's going to try to make me hit my butt. So if I fall down, hit my butt, I lose the game. So I have to stay on top, and my job is to hold him down without using my chest, without using my knees. And I'm going to give a secondary task. I want to get as close to my opponent with my legs as I can by keeping their feet off of me. So while we play, I have to use my hands to hold him down, and I'm moving around his body. So I'm using my hands to hold him down, but I can't drop. And I have to do it while I'm facing all of his connections and going to work. So I'm producing the function of stay on top and holding him down, but I'm doing it in the face of a high amount of variability relative to him trying to attach to me and make me fall.
Yeah.
So there's actually a lot. The whole game is being played, but the focus is on one piece of it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's why I don't like that word in general, scaffolding. I don't think it fits with the true sense of what you're trying to achieve here. And you're not teaching one technique and then building on that. You're teaching, like, that's completely different. That's the same affordance, or as we start the other one, when the opponent's lying, you're both lying on the ground, but it's a completely different problem to solve. Technique.
For sure.
It's got some of the same principles and same end in mind, but
because think about how crazy it would be if we try to actually talk about the technique, right? So where would I have to pause in the whole sequence of events to tell you that this was a series of movements that I did? So like, let's imagine we're using a simple relationship. So there's a simple relationship in the body between what's called heel height and hip downness. So all this means is that the higher I hold his heel, the more downed his hip is. So if he wants to get up off the floor, right?
Yeah.
He's going to have to put his foot on the floor. Otherwise he's not getting off his back. Yeah. So again, as the foot lowers, he can start building height, right?
Right.
So, but if I'm using this to hold him down, where is the technique? Like, is it where my legs are doing? Is it which hand I'm holding, and what sequence of events? Like, where's the technique?
Yeah.
I mean, we instead we just note the relationship. So there's a condition that we can meet, i.e. heel height. So the higher we can hold someone's heel, the more hip downness we can have. So produce that any way that you can.
Mm-hmm. Right. You're creating this relationship. Again, I like the way you of between what you were trying to achieve and what he's trying to achieve. Yeah.
Because our movements don't make sense out of the context in which we use them.
Yeah, for sure. That's great. Question: Do you do any coaching of kind of striking MMA? Right?
I do not. I always reserve that for Scott Savewright. Right. I think you might have talked to him before.
I haven't yet.
He's striking MMA coach. He does a beautiful job at trying to ride the line between ethical damage, meaning not taking punches to the head to damage your brain, and teaching people how to strike effectively. I actually took one of his classes for the first time because I've never taken a class of striking. We did a seminar together, and he ran a striking portion, and it was amazing to experience. I was like, "You're a genius! Like, this is good stuff." I mean, having students moving and punching each other and kicking each other day one in a relevant way while also being safe, it was amazing. So. Yeah. Guys, Scott Savewright, Prime MMA, he's your man.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, he does some good stuff. And he does very, ecological approach as well. How he teaches the fundamentals of a stance is very great. I like the way he does that. So, So, I think those are good examples, Greg. And then, so there any kind of other, as you get more advanced, or you just kind of adding more or giving more variance and more?
For sure. And we're making the concepts become a little bit more complex in their orientation. And so what we do is we try to take something like for example, like we would take heel height, and we would organize games around just producing that effect in variable ways, different starting alignments, different grips. But the job is to down the hips by focusing on interacting with your partner's feet. And so we'll just make it more complex for the more advanced student. And also, when we're doing advanced students, there are advanced students fighting advanced students. So that in itself increases the complexity and difficulty of the exchange. And we do lots of variation. Like we'll go from one situation to another, to another, to another.
Yeah. And I think you had a really good point when you're talking about, the problem, I think one of the biggest problems I have with the information processing is, separating kind of in linear order, perceiving, cognition, and then acting. You're right. Where does the acting occur in that move? You're always acting. It's a constant. You're always perceiving. You can't create a discrete move out of the discrete event of action occurred now. That's a continuous unfolding that you get in a lot of problems when you try to think about it that way, I think.
Yeah, I think it's really just a problem of analysis. I think
Yeah.
like when we try to analyze behavior, we have to start to reduce it. But there becomes a point where there are certain types of things in the world that are not reducible. And if we're
Hmm.
talking about, or if we're talking about sport, when does it start and end? Like,
Yeah.
where is that line? These lines are arbitrary, and they can
Hmm.
help for a discussion that we can analyze them to death. But in sense, we're creating a model of reality, and to create that model, we have to pull it from the context in which it functions. So therefore, reducing
Hmm.
the information present, we're actually ruining it by doing so. So again, we need to do it for discussion purposes, but
Yeah.
again, I think we're missing the point if we think that we train it that same way.
Yeah. No, I think so too. I think you're missing a lot of the. Yeah, I think I don't like. Yeah, like I wrote about this a lot of reducing action to like pressing a button on a video game controller. Just like action is is an intelligent part of it's gathering information, right? I'm sure that's a lot too in your fight, right? You're moving to. Uh, is there? And this is probably a naive question. Is there a lot of deception in
Oh,
submission grappling?
that's a great. Yes. So first of all, I mean, you know this. If I speak in such a way that I'm talking like you don't know these things, I know that you know these things. So
No
please
problem.
forgive me.
Well, actually, I don't
But
know that one. Yeah, but
we're black boxes. I don't know what's going on in your mind. You don't know what's going on in mine. We
yeah.
meet somewhere in the middle, and we can sort of perceive each other's affordances. And I think that's how sport works. Is that
Hmm.
we don't know we know, but we know we know. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
It's the thing that's unsaid. We're just assuming. But either way, yeah, deception is taking place at all times. And I think the way that we use deception in our field is through novelty.
Okay.
I think there's a lot of room for novelty here in our sport still because the way it's trained. Since it's trained using a step-by-step process, information processing model, and everyone's being trained that way, the guy who thinks of the tricky move that no one's ever seen coming from the tricky grip no one's ever used,
Hmm.
that's really going to be
Yeah.
highlighted in a stable system.
Yeah.
And I think because of the nature of we repeat what our instructor showed us, and then they repeat that, and that
Yeah.
that creates a false stability in the system, which makes it prone to perturbation, which enhances the novel effect. But
Hmm.
if let's imagine 20 years from now, and all coaches use some model of self-organization, and we played to condition and effect, I think we would see less of that novelty because that novelty would be present in the training environment more often than it is now.
Yeah.
So yeah, we use deception, but we use it in the face of novelty. Like I said, the tricky grip, the tricky position no one's ever seen, and then we put that into the system in competition. It rises in success. People start adopting that new model, and then it starts to reduce in its effect. So yeah, deception takes place in that way. Deception also takes place in what we call feints. So
Yeah.
movements that
That's what I was
look
more
like
thinking.
movements
Yeah.
that look like they're going
I'm
to
gonna
happen, but they
grab.
don't actually happen.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that happens too. One
Yeah.
direction, other direction, high,
Hmm.
low, this movement to that movement.
Hmm. Are
Yeah.
you ever like instructing that, or they come out on their?
So there are some that we can instruct, meaning there are these relationships are sister problems. So, for
Mm.
example, we can think of simple ones. If I try to extend an elbow, we could say that we're going to resist by going the opposite directions. Therefore, so again, if we extend an elbow and they resist, it becomes more contractible. If we
Mm.
contract an elbow and they resist, it becomes more extendable. So, letting them understand that or cueing them to giving them a task where they get to manipulate that idea
Mhm.
can help them attune to that, and they can use it deceptively. So
Yeah.
let's say I want you to open your elbow. I want you to make that choice. So if I push it in, and so I've set up a framework for anticipation. So
Mhm.
I'm not really anticipating and like they will do this,
Yeah.
but in a probabilistic way, because I know that pushing response usually causes pushback to
Mhm.
some degree. We can be deceptive with that.
Yeah. No, and I know a lot of people deception is a lot of people have trouble with in the ecological, but you're essentially manipulating the affordances you create for someone else, right? You're creating that manipulating what in the example of feints anyway. Yeah.
If I'm in a empty room, and I want people to sit down, create chairs.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, and
Yeah.
find a way to make their legs tired. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
They'll sit down. So it like we're not manipulating a completely chaotic system. We can
No.
say there are things about human bodies and human psychology that are more likely to happen in one situation versus another. And this is especially true when we get to pull the levers. So when I get to affect you and we're working with a system that has known quantities or known qualities,
Yeah.
we could be more likely to create one in the face of another.
Do you get into the attractors much, Greg, in your thinking and
Yeah,
instruction? Yeah.
we do.
Mm.
So this is always a difficult topic to talk about. So we want our students to be attracted to specific sources of information, but
Yeah.
we definitely don't want them to get stuck there. So I think I've come up with a way to make them all, and this is going to sound crazy, and we can talk about this further, but metastable.
Okay.
And so it was inspired by something that you put out a while back. You gave the study where they were saying that when boxers were asked to do a series of punches, by getting close enough to the bag where they're basically a half arm's length away, this increased the amount of punch variability that we saw, therefore suggesting that, I guess, middle distance is metastable as it relates to punch variability. And so I was like, okay, well, there's something must be special about middle distance. And I realized that middle distance is basically a position where we're both close enough to absolutely harm each other. And this is the same thing that's true in a grappling situation. So positioning ourselves in specific alignments relative to our partner's middle joints, i.e., getting close enough to be close to their knees or getting close enough to be close enough to their elbows produces an opportunity for a bunch of different actions to emerge. I mean, moving the elbow out of the way creates opportunities for arm locks. Moving the elbow out of the way creates opportunities for back takes. Moving the elbow out of the way creates opportunities for head and arm strangles. So just that one state space has many attractors in that space, and one more strong than another. So what we do to build this metastability, as we do a lot of task focus that get us from the end point, hand and feet, to the midpoint, knee and elbow, and then we create a lot of tasks there.
Okay. I like that. Yeah. So
So
you're
that way
not
we
really,
do.
yeah.
The attractors itself is to get close to the middle joints, but once we're there, we have a wide range of opportunity that we can start to then, I guess you could say, specialize in, or we could go in whatever direction that we would like to, relative to our partner's resistances. So not one is more strong than the other. I mean,
Okay.
physically anyway, maybe psychologically, but
Yeah. A couple more questions from the audience. Great. Do you use the same type of games and systems when working with high level competitors as beginners, or they're kind of how do they differ?
the simple answer is they differ in complexity. So
Okay.
when we're dealing with high level athletes, we're asking them to do more. And I don't mean more like step one, step two. I mean, we're asking them to fill a multitude of conditions at the same time
Okay.
to produce, a varying degree of outcome, but that all relate to some end state. Um, so that's really what changes. The amount of variability present in each from situation to situation also goes up.
Okay.
Time gets longer. So we use long time with advanced guys. So they have tons of workspace. We want to reduce urgency by creating a long enough time to explore interactions, which again increases variability in and of itself. So just their variability goes up.
Yeah. Well, same way I think of it too. You kind of scale it. Yeah. And then from classroom to competitive match competition, what are the differences in language and communication and things like that?
So again, since we let the shared experience be the invariant of why we say one thing or another. We try to connect external and human focused language to bridge what's happening in practice and what's happening in performance.
Right.
So for example, if we're playing a game where we're trying to access our opponent's hips, for example, we want to focus on hips, we'll literally say that in a competitive setting. So when someone is segmenting, going from feet to knees, and they're at a point where the hips become available, focus hips, focus hips. So we're just shifting the attention. That's where you should be looking, right?
Okay.
If somebody's getting pushed, clear hands, clear hands, clear hands, right? We're getting them focused on what they're already doing in practice. We're just refocusing them. And I only speak when I feel that I need to also. So largely I'll be quiet. And it also changes athlete to athlete. There are some athletes that need to be reminded because they get a little locked in sometimes. They feel the emotion of the competitive environment. So my voice could be comforting. I know it sounds silly, comforting to them. So if I'm instructing them, hip focus, clear hands, get under elbows, get behind elbows, they tend to perform better because basically they rely on me a little bit for psychological push.
Yeah. But you're trying to get them back to that. and
For
those
sure.
games you taught. Yeah.
And sometimes I just yell crazy things at them to get them pumped up, because some people, they get a little nervous and they tend to flee. So like, like I would make the same joke. I have a student who have to yell things like, "We came to fight." You know what I mean?
Yeah. So this is the
Stay closer to the
individual constraints, right?
For
Because
sure.
people have different pressure and readiness, and that's not something we talk a lot about, but definitely there's different athletes respond to different things. Yeah.
But if we're going to use language, I really try to keep it both external, based
Mm-hmm.
on the effect we're having on our opponent, and it's got to be the same things I say in the room. I don't want to introduce novelty into the system when it matters. So I don't want to go out there and say something they never heard before, because it
Yeah.
could pull their attention away from what they're doing.
Yeah. And I know from talking to you before, you try to introduce these concepts like invariance. You try to use that consistently to teaching, not something, don't avoid try to dumb it down too much, but obviously explain it. But I think that's the key. I always gets me super excited when I hear like a coach in a group I'm working with, they start saying constraint or whatever, they use it right. I'm like, like I got, that's what, once you get that kind of just spread across the system, it just great.
Well, I think like I get a lot of pushback on this too, because people want it to be simpler than it is. And so when I'm teaching a room, it's human Greg talking to human students, doing human things, playing jiu-jitsu, but it all is informed by the science that I've learned. So if I need to explain what this is, I can talk about, invariance. I can talk about degeneracy. I can talk about repetition without repetition. I can talk about action fidelity. I can talk about all these things because they're relevant to why I'm having my students do what I'm having them do.
Yeah.
But they don't need to know it to practice.
For
But
sure.
I need to know it as the coach. So if I don't have a clear definition of what an affordance is, what an attractor is, then how can I manipulate these things? If I don't understand why you scientists are giving us this nice, easy, clear language, then what good am I using your science? And really, it's out of respect to you guys. You guys are doing work, giving me the opportunity to try to take all your work and apply it to what I'm doing. And so out of respect, I'm not going to dumb down my language. I refuse. I don't care if people get mad at me for
it. No, I appreciate that, Greg, a lot. And also appreciate the value you see. Like, you have to, I don't know how you think you can coach without having a theory of learning. At least, like, you have to have something in your head of your beliefs about how people learn, right? Whatever it is, that's what's guiding your coach. I get frustrated with this idea that we don't need theory to coach. Maybe not on that you can write down and put in an article, but you have in your mind, whether you think it's repetition or technique or whatever it is. Yeah.
I mean, beliefs inform action. If we think the human brain is a computer that stores information, we're going to act differently than if we think it's a modeling system or something. We're going to act differently if we assume one thing or another. So I think we have to start with some assumption, as clear as we can start, some assumption, and then we work towards that.
Yeah. Okay, here's a good one. Maybe we can work on it together. What is the relationship between attractors and invariants?
Okay.
Ooh, okay.
So I'll give you my best shot.
Yeah.
So I want them to be attracted to things that produce known outcomes. So we call this physical certainty. So there are some conditions that probabilistically will produce stable outcomes, and because we have a historical record that we can lean on. So for example, if I want to get good at passing the legs, I have to first get good at clearing feet. I got to keep your feet off of me if I want to get closer. Now I know that what I mean by getting closer is I'm trying to step in between knees or outside knees. So if we look at the historical record of passing, you'll see this as an invariant relationship, that legs become more passable once we clear feet and step in between or outside knees. Once we reach the line of the knee, the hips become more accessible. So we see this relationship emerge over and over and over again. So that is invariant. So when we start using the invariants and we give them task focus and we want them to emerge, this is how we create an attractor towards those outcomes. We want that to be attractive behavior. We want that to produce the effect because we know it does. And now, but we leave it loose enough that if something else were to show up, we would understand why.
Yeah. No, I like that. I think I've always tried to draw a parallel between, Gibson's invariance in information space and attractors in movement space are very parallel concepts. I think they're both kind of trying to solve the same problem. Like invariance is essentially a solution to the degrees of freedom problem of information. There's too much. There's too many things you could use. All the million things you could see an opponent doing. How do I know what is going to tell me what opportunities I have? Reduce the space. Yeah.
Agreed. And I
Yeah.
think like lines of demarcation that are manipulated
Yeah.
body to body appear
Mhm.
over and over and over again. So that's the easiest way we
Yeah.
can access it if we don't really understand. Because again, we're working with the body. We have a known outcome, and now we can see historically what has produced these effects. And if we're
Mhm.
clever and we look clearly, you'll see that these effects are produced by a small amount of behaviors, very small amount of behaviors, maybe only one or two, even if we could even define them as single behaviors, at least conditions anyway.
Yeah.
And if these conditions are met, known outcomes are produced or known effects are produced. So again, that's how we can merge, I think, invariance with attractor.
Yeah, and I think it also for me, like I think it's a good example, like to explain specification to people. Like if this condition is met, this condition will only be met in this situation. That's what specification.
Exactly.
No other, right? Your arm's going to break if this is
Right.
is met, right? There's no other thing that can happen, right?
And we've actually I tried to create a video on that. It's on my IG. It's invariance. So when I try to explain to the community what I mean by invariance, and we use the arm lock as an example. So we use the invariant features present in arm lock. So attachment to the base joint or staying as close to the shoulder as possible, separating the hands from everything that that can defend it, while holding your partner to the floor. If I can do these things, then the arm becomes more breakable. So this is true in all cases. Like there's not a single arm lock case where we're not producing some functional effect at the base joint. Where we haven't separated the hands, we haven't been holding our partner down relative to the mat. These are why arm locks work. So anyway,
Yeah.
so we teach that.
Do you ever? Do you ever like? Do you use demonstration much? Do you like demonstrate you doing things? Yeah. How do you think about that?
So I feel mixed about it. So early on, I tried to use only state demonstration. So I put myself in the state that I want them to operate in, and I give them a set of conditions or tasks I want them to try to fulfill towards some objective outcome, some objective, right? And I don't give clear demonstrations of process there. What is
That's
that
the key
noise?
for me.
Sorry. And the reason I don't do that initially is because of the reliance on current information. So my students tend to copy the coach. I notice this. And so they'll just do what they think I'm doing. They won't actually try to search. So I try to pull that back a little bit early on because I just want play. I want play to happen. However, if I'm working with a more advanced student and they clearly understand how to engage in the process, I'll be like, look, here's an idea and this is how I use it. Just watch. And I'll do a motion a few times. You know what I mean? I'm like, see if you can reproduce that effect. And then they'll go about it their own time. So I think with an advanced athlete, you can use a little more representation, maybe is the best way to say it.
Yeah, I think the key there is you're right. Not people talk too much when they give demonstrations. That's probably the problem, right? You just let the athlete take out of it what they perceive rather than say, watch my knee, see how straight when I'm doing this. I think that's the problem. Yeah.
Well, the problem is, does it always have to be straight? Is that just straight because your body dimensions, your intrinsic dynamics are having that effect? I mean, why is that happening? I mean, we could use it to come to some invariant relationship, but is it? So
yeah, there's a good intrinsic dynamics. So you have people come in your class from lots of different backgrounds in terms of sporting ability and previous histories. Do you find that you just kind of you just incorporate in this by allowing them to find their own, or do you think much about this person might do with this will be drawn to this way, or do you how do you think about that kind of?
So we do have a special population. So barring any limited factors, so limited factors need to be worked out. So we first have to understand that this is a physical tiring thing that we do. So you're going to have to play it for a while until your form is in shape to play it effectively. And that's going to take place whether you get in shape by playing the game or you do something else in the sporting, strength conditioning context. Either way, imagine no limiting factors, just intrinsic dynamics. So larger people, like people that move less, sometimes I go to them by themselves. When I'm seeing big guys work together, I'll give them different task focuses than the smaller guys, because there are things that bigger guys that they won't come out. It won't emerge. It won't be the same. And this is funny. Big guys have bellies, and you wouldn't believe how much having a belly affects the effective functional length of your legs. So yeah, seriously. So we have a position in jiu-jitsu where we take each other's back. We get behind each other and we hold on to the hips and shoulders. So one of the ways that what this looks like is if I get behind an opponent, I attach their hips to stay connected and manage rotation with my legs. And to the shoulders, I use my arms to attach to the shoulders to manage rotation, right? So, but when someone's got a belly, like let's say I'm a big guy and I got a belly right here, sometimes my legs don't function very well in the same way. So for big guys, we use things like single hooks, help deal with the belly problem,
Okay.
or using my connection to take my opponent belly down and try to stay more on top rather than pulling them on top of us would be something I would guide a bigger guy towards, because I know from coaching that belly is going to be an issue.
Okay. You
pretty
recognize
likely.
an individual
So
constraint. Yeah.
but that's like a highly specific example.
Yeah. I think it's the idea, well, we're not supposed to be able to well define them ahead of time, right? The intrinsic dynamics, the idea is that you're going to tendency to coordinate in a certain way. But I think you're right. If you can identify individual constraints that might shape that, I think is what
For
the
sure.
best
I
you
mean,
can do as a coach. Yeah.
but you will see this. I mean, if you were to go to our sport and you were to watch people over 200 pounds play the game and watch people under 200 pounds play the game, you're going to see some similarities with how they organize. And again, and it's going to, and one thing that affects this is height. Like height really does affect things. So if you're taller and heavier, you're probably going to have more success than if you're shorter or heavier. And I'm not saying this as a absolute, please don't get me wrong, but I'm saying you'll notice these relationships. They seem to exist as far to my whatever level of analysis I'm using. So yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. Let's see what we got. Very specific question here. How did you get DeAndre so good at back triangles? What kind of games and constraints did you use?
Okay. So I'll give you a loose definition, but actually I'm saving that for D himself. So when he goes out and starts teaching his own stuff, I want him to have some room to explore. But either way, I'll talk to you a little bit about him and why we came
share, Greg.
Yeah, for sure. So anyway, D has, I don't know, we haven't measured his arms, but they're a little bit short. He does not strangle with his arms from the back very well. But his legs are a little bit longer than his torso. So we were like, let's get our legs involved. So the legs produce more pressure than the arms. I mean, they're the legs, right? So we just organized him around that. He was really struggling. And how this appeared is we play when we play submission only events. Submission only is there's no score. And then if the time limit goes off and no player has submitted each other, they start in an overtime situation where they start on each other's backs, for example. And D was not winning. He could not strangle these people. So we're like, man, let's try to get these legs. Anyway, so we're like, let's get your legs involved. They're longer, and they're better for strangulation. So what we did was we taught him how to create what we call the arm in, arm out scenario. So the idea is that in order to strangle with the legs, we want a head and arm included in the system. So all this means is that if you look at my opponent's arms, if I'm able to take one of the arms and connect it to the head and close something around this space, I can cause compression at the shoulder on one side and the neck on the other. So if we compress these two areas together, as this compresses the carotid arteries, stopping blood flow to the brain, and they go unconscious. So as you can see, the arms are not long enough to create meaningful compression. Now, some people can, but this can be difficult for a guy with short arms. But if we look at my legs, I'm able to get my legs around this area very easily. I can close my legs around that structure and squeeze to particular effect. And so what we did was we would just have him start in different situations, chest to chest or chest to back, where we had him use his legs, get his legs involved in creating arm in, arm out scenarios. And so we would do starting him in them, working all the way to the finish, starting him in different alignments and creating them as the win condition. So we put it everywhere in his pinning. We put it everywhere in his pinning. So it became almost a central task focus for almost anything he was doing, chest to chest or chest to back.
Okay. That makes sense. Yeah. So do you, I guess this is a tough, it makes me think of a question I get asked a lot. So as a coach, where you're watching someone and like that, but from based on the constraints, what you're seeing, you know what solutions may not be effective.
Yes.
Like so that's why, so you're not going to just stand and do nothing, right? That's why the phrase I use a lot, great. I was like guiding self-organization.
I do too.
So you want to step in and say, I know, like you have knowledge. The coaches have knowledge. You watch lots of people fight.
For sure.
To not use that as silly.
Right? Absolutely.
Just to let people flail away and come out with a,
absolutely.
Right. So you want to guide. And so it's a way that you're using it, right? You're going to use it to design games.
Well, the first way is just practice design. That should be our first intervention. So our practices should be robust enough to give students an opportunity to discover the things that I now know. And
Yeah.
I should be able to use my knowledge in such a way to enhance that search. So the
Mhm.
goal isn't to have them reinvent the wheel. It's have them
Yeah.
to start them using the same wheels that we're using now. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
a lot of historical record is just really bad trial and error. So we can kind of jump over all that stuff and start with these things. So if we know that, for example, head and arm produces strong strangulation, then we put people in head and arm scenarios, teach them how to create them, teach how to manipulate the arms to get there. We know
Mhm.
this. So again, practice design should be the first intervention.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree.
And then I think the other interventions like explicit instruction, for example, or coach student feedback should be used in a limited fashion and later on.
Mhm.
I feel that adult learners tend to have the expectation of fast knowledge acquisition or
Yeah.
fast skill acquisition, which is just adults are pruned and efficient. So we want everything to be that way, but we
Yeah.
forget the nature of having acquired all these things, which is mostly through play and you know, higher levels of frequent interaction. So I try to let that be the first thing.
Yeah. No, I had the same experience. Right. Show me the hack to have a good tennis serve. What's the simple tip you're gonna give me? So I'll suddenly start serving well. I'm
You know,
sorry, go to another coach. I don't have one.
I know.
Yeah, you're gonna have to practice it lots of times. Yeah.
And it's funny, people will do that. Like I have people
Yeah.
avoid me when they want to talk to go to
Mhm.
other people in the room. Because
Mhm.
even though I will guide them to a solution, sometimes, man, they don't want that burden. They want the guy over there to tell them the grip
Yeah,
that
for
they
sure.
use, and they just give me the grip. I don't care what
There
Coach Greg says.
there is a definite kind of personality thing we have to with a lot of athletes, their willingness to deal with this kind of uncertainty. And the model we've dealt with so long is I come to you because you're going to tell me how to do it, and
Yeah,
to let
for
go of
sure.
that is very hard for some people. Right?
But I mean,
I think,
as a student, what creates a change? Me telling it to you, or you trying it yourself? And
yeah.
there are some students I'll do this experience with. Okay, and I'll give them a ridiculous 13-step process. Like, go ahead, give that a shot, and I'll stop. Like, what was step 7? That's fucking no. But it's like, hey, keep your partner's feet off you, closer to the knees. Tell me how that feels. And
Mhm.
the good thing about our program is the culture around self-organization is strong and everyone has bought in.
Okay.
So it's very easy to convince people here in my room. I mean, it's very easy. It's not that difficult. The good thing is it actually acts as a filtering system to how serious the student is. The student,
Mhm.
when exposed to it, will know whether or not they want to put that level of effort into what we're doing. And so that helps. I don't have to really, and I don't have to go deep into like, you should learn this way versus that way.
Yeah.
It tends to take care of itself.
Yeah. That culture and environment you create is an important thing. I think,
Oh, it's a
I
constraint in and
see.
of
Yeah.
itself, right?
Yeah. You do create an environment where it's expected and kind of coaches aren't saying a million things. And yeah, that creates, I guess, one last one. I'll let you go. Use of video film. Do you film people and let them watch back?
Oh, so we don't do that in particular, but just because of the nature of our room. I mean, most people in here are just pedestrians who are coming in to have a great time and they like jujitsu. I mean, we would have about 10 highly serious athletes who are trying to make something in the jiu-jitsu world. Um, so no, we don't. We don't film class as a whole. Now, I don't bar people. There's often people who bring their cameras and set them up and film
Mhm.
their own practice, and I urge it because to me, looking out at what's happening can inspire you to see things in different ways.
Mhm.
I don't know to what degree it's going to affect your skill, but I do know it could inspire you to see things differently. And
Yeah.
so, if it's in our toolbox, why not use it?
Yeah.
Um,
No,
I
I think
watch
it's,
matches like crazy.
yeah, I think it's the same as instruction, demonstrate. It's just how you use it. It's just a tool, right? You don't use it to use corrective technical things. Use it. There's an opportunity I could have taken. I think that's a good way to think about it. Yeah, for sure. I think it's useful. So this has been great, Greg. Thank you. It
Yeah.
really helps to see it in action. I hope for people and to get more from you. You mentioned you have Instagram. Where you post lots of videos and stuff. Is
Yeah.
that the
So
best place for people to go?
yeah, at GD Souders, at
Okay.
Standard Jiu-Jitsu, we have
Yeah.
stuff on there, and then we have a lot of the guys in the community that are starting to push this method forward.
Mhm.
So we have, I think there's an Ecological Dynamics Discord. There's an
Yeah, there's
Ecological
a
Jiu-Jitsu
Reddit.
page.
Yeah,
There's all kinds of stuff going
yeah,
on. So
I've seen.
I urge you guys to get involved. Read Rob
Yeah,
Gray's stuff. Read the other stuff that's out there. And get involved.
yeah, and I
There's
think,
lots of information.
kind of fitting with the exploration, right? We're all still trying to figure it out too. So,
Yeah.
and we're all happy to discuss ideas and rethink things. And I think that it's a good community for sure.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, the only advantage I have, guys, is I was an early adopter. You know,
mhm,
I just got on it super 2014, and
yeah.
I've been
Greg
applying it.
had to read the source material. Start, with
I did.
start reading Turvey and all the hard stuff. So
It was crazy. I told you before, I'd walk my dog and I would just listen to your podcast. I went all the way back to the beginning and I just
mhm,
started every day. It was new, a new, a new one. And then when you would give the source material, I'd go home after walking the dog and I'd read the source material. And I just kept doing this. A lot of times I had no idea. I remember when I was trying to understand degeneracy, like I was so frustrated with that. I
yeah,
was like, but how does it matter? Why does it matter here? Like,
yeah,
I couldn't. And then when I saw it and I was like, oh my God. And then it just changed me. And then my tasks became easier to create. I started to see why students were having problems here versus here. It opened it up for me. So it was really the constant revisiting of the knowledge about, applying it, gaining knowledge of, and just kind of
mm,
bouncing between these types of
yeah,
information and
yeah. No,
adjusting as I went along.
I've had a similar experience. Is it true by the nonlinear bifurcation and the way, yeah, like I went from okay, so Gibson some makes a little bit of sense to now I look at the whole world differently.
For sure.
Over one kind of, I don't remember exactly what it was that inspired it, but it was just kind of it was a sudden step change and like in my way of thinking and understanding it. Yeah,
Yeah, I've had these huge jumps, man. And actually,
yeah.
one of the funny ones that I'm obsessed with now, and I can't get the thought out of my head, is analog machines.
Hmm.
So machines that are like just structured in such a way when the wind hits it, makes continuous motion that looks like a creature walking, or they
Hmm.
create this shape that falls down the stairs and looks like something walking down the stairs. Uh, and I can't unsee that now. So when I watch bodies engage, I see these analog machines. I don't see the central controller anymore.
Hmm.
And it's just it's really changing the way that I see interaction, and it's inspiring me to act differently too. But anyway, that's my new current.
Your new way of looking at the
Yeah,
world.
yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
It's all just structure v structure, and in our case, it's guided by intentionality.
Hmm.
But anyway,
Yeah,
that's my
well, that's great. Well, thank you everyone for joining us, and hope that you enjoyed that. I'm going to end this, Greg.
yes, sir.